You can't start like a moonshot of a business model. You have to start by solving a very specific problem for a very specific segment of customers that represents the larger business opportunity.
I think that the roadmap that most young people are given for how to manage debt, how to manage their careers, how to build towards this at this point mostly fictitious notion of a happy functional retirement, like it's mostly all kind of an economic and arithmetical disaster. And we got to change what we're teaching them, or else I think we're setting ourselves up for a real problem in 50 years. So what do you think? Am I a fringe lunatic, or do you see the world through this lens that I do of like, oh crap, we got to get in and we got to start helping them young, or else we're headed for a real problem?
I love it. So I often...
But welcome to the deep end of the pool, by the way. I hope you didn't think this was going to be a light interview.
Oh, definitely not. No, definitely not. So I often look at these podcast interviews as poetic in timing, because there's really so much that happens on what would normally be considered like the mundane day-to-day, that when asked questions in this kind of public forum, you get to really start to synthesize down. It's like, oh, wow, that's really what this means to me. So I'm going to kind of talk philosophically about what I believe you just said. And then what I think is really helpful for people who are also kind of tagging along for this conversation is to actually represent this in a physical manifestation that you could use as kind of an anchor to understand my point. So I'm right now in Exeter, California, which is about 30 minutes from Sequoia National Park, which is officially the 27th national park I've been to in the last 18 months. So we're big hikers, big collectors of those really marquee experiences. The national park system has been around for about 150 years. And truly, it's a system that was put into place for the next generation. It was actually almost impossible at the time in which the first national parks were created, among one of the first, Death Valley and Sequoia, which is kind of the region that I'm in now, Kings Canyon. Someone realized, oh wow, if we don't preserve this, then it's going to be gone, and that's something that we should really make an important point to protect. And so that's future thinking. But what people often forget to think through is how day-to-day planning and actions actually turn into future resources and future opportunity for the next generation. And so what I often kind of think about and kind of, driving down from Sequoia National Park / this incredible forest that, these trees, the largest by volume tree in the entire world, and these massive towering trees. And, we're driving this road, right, that was created over the course of, the last 50 years with careful engineering, like unbelievable, the ability to really climb up this crazy mountain. And so, we're driving down, it's like, oh my God. First of all, how did they even realize that up there was these incredible trees? Like, this is like probably 15, 20 miles from the base of the mountain. And it just driving 20 miles an hour, it took 40 minutes to get up there. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, they must have hiked up. They said, oh my God, this is amazing. How do we make this accessible to everyday human beings? And so what's really amazing is that the physical road that we're driving on is really something that the last generation and the generation before them ideated, created, and now we get to use as if it's a regular freeway that's part of our, access points. And like, my dad was traveling, this region of the world 50 years ago. He couldn't go up there that easily. You needed a 4-wheel drive car, and they didn't have paved roads, and there was no, markers on the side or barriers to make sure that it was safe. And like all of these implications that have now been thought through, because day-to-day activities lead to large improvements in infrastructure. And so I look at education as a very similar concept. It's like, what can we do, through the mundane day-to-day activities today that ultimately set up that highway system that enables people to access, certain, amazing opportunities, amazing resources that otherwise previous generations hadn't been able to access. And something that's even more interesting is the fact that whoever was building it, may have necessarily made it their life's work, but it really wasn't for them, right? It's not for them. It's for the next generation. So starting to now think about, yes, the mundane is important, but how that aligns with, the goal of society to serve that next generation, to me, is what this really comes down to. And I know it's really hard to understand that from an education to work, standpoint and just a learning standpoint, because education is everywhere. You don't have to physically walk into school anymore in order to learn. You just have to open your internet browser, your phone. You just ask questions to the people around you and you could be learning. So it's much harder to understand how you can create pathways from an educational standpoint by engaging in experiential learning and experiential hiring. But it is really easy to understand how Sequoia National Park and the US government was able to create this incredible infrastructure that, yes, maybe wasn't able to be used by the people who actually created that, but ultimately now can be used by the next generation. So that's kind of like my take on your point of like, yeah, it might be scary to now be entering a world where, yeah, you can traverse the entire Death Valley or climb 5,000 feet by car in an AC comfortable cabin, as opposed to, who knows, the old way of trying to get up these crazy mountains. But it's because someone thought 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, hey, this place should be preserved. We should make it accessible to the public. We should really try to use this as a place of education and immersion into to an ecosystem that otherwise is inaccessible. And I think that's, to me, a very physical representation of what, education companies are really trying to do by creating tools to make connection and learning more efficient and effective.
Now that's really cool. It's so funny too, because I think about like 2008 when I got started on the internet for business. I mean, I was checking email well before that, but and it was kind of like trying to reach this promised land of these giant magical trees. And I won't say there was no road, because in 2008, there were guys like John Reese and Frank Kern and Jeff Walker and Eben Page. It was kind of like the OGs of internet marketing. And they had made it to the trees. Like there was like a beaten footpath. Right. And, I wore my ass out getting up there, but it's like you say, now what my company's doing is we're kind of going like, no, we want millions of people to be able to reach these trees. So we're going to put in a road or widen the road and pave the road and put buffer barriers up on the road so people don't drive off the edge. And that's such a great analogy, but like we didn't create the trees and we didn't discover the trees.
Right.
We're really committed to getting more people access to the trees. Exactly. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to totally be sharing that on some internal calls. That's really brilliant. So then help me, if you would. This is not a call. This is not a conversation about me. It's a conversation about you. Like going with that metaphor, what would you say are the trees? And what would you say you're doing to get more people access?
Good. That's a great kind of compounding metaphor now. So our vision, so I'll back up for just a moment and kind of share a little bit of my story as to how I got into all this. But, I started basically as a college student. My mom didn't work. My dad was a doctor and an immigrant to the United States. So definitely didn't have kind of the foundation from the two of them to coach me on what to do from a career perspective. My mom always said, you're going to be a wheeler dealer businessman. My sister, like from the get-go, was immediately attracted to education. That's all she knew from being a student her entire life, and said, you know what? I see my teachers. I appreciate my teachers. I love learning, and therefore I'll love teaching. And so I kind of took all of these kind of, experiences and channeled it into my my degree program at Lehigh, where my mom said, hey, you're going to be a business guy. I went to business undergrad focused program. Asked a bunch of guys in my fraternity, hey, what should I study? I'm obviously looking for a job afterwards. And they were like accounting and finance. Those are the two best majors out of Lehigh for job placement and, starting salary. And so I thought, okay, that's what college is all about. I'm going to major in that and I'm going to make it happen for the early stage of my career. Well, going into senior year is the first time that really any companies will accept interns formally as part of their organization. And that's too late, right? Because at that moment, I was interning at KPMG in one of the most amazing intern programs where I got to choose 2 different practices and basically have 2 different internships and tons of mentors and exposure. And I absolutely hated it. I thought it was totally off base. It was not for me. And I was like, holy moly. I was like, I did everything right. I'm getting A's in all my classes. I got the internship. I got the pre-internship program where they do an immersive experience. I was like, why isn't there any way for students to kind of learn what the working world is like while they're students? And so that's really kind of what the trees are for me, is the ability to connect industry with academia, with student learning, and create pathways from education to work. Pathways that don't necessarily say, okay, you're heading in one direction, it's a one-way street, and if you get to your destination and you're not happy, that's on you, right? I think that there needs to be plenty of places to pop a UE, to turn left and totally go after a new vision, because ultimately that's the type of generation that we're incubating with the next generation. Like, they really want responsive learning. They really want more of an idea of what's out there. And so I thought that was not for me, what I was getting at school. And when I investigated and I was asking educators at my school, why don't we do more of industry integrated learning? Why aren't we doing case studies with companies and helping real entrepreneurs solve problems for their own businesses, and, working with large corporations on ideating new products or coming up with new target audience, marketing strategies and other ways of just like helping to understand what it's like to be someone in marketing, or what it's like to be in public accounting or internal accounting. Like, these are incredibly important things to learn as a student entering the professional world. That wasn't available to me. And so I asked my educators, why not? And basically they said, you can't buy that off the shelf like you can a textbook. And because textbooks are created nice so that we can ultimately use those for educational purposes, that's why we use those. And that's more convenient and easy for us to implement. And I said, but what if you could? What if we could just literally package it in that way and say, hey, this is a curriculum that's industry integrated. You can learn, you have this real company, you have dialogue, you have ways of actually building something real and valuable. Your homework is not just being graded and thrown into the trash can with every other piece of, deliverable generated by students for the last 2 decades. It's something that actually the company can use. And so that's really what kind of was the impetus for me, is deciding, hey, industry integrated learning is important. I want to empower leaders of business to not only lead their business, but also be mentors for the next generation, because otherwise no one thinks about it, right? They're not thinking about how their work in their day-to-day is actually laying the foundation, is at the building blocks of that road to the tops of those trees, which is really those students' future leadership opportunities. Because, maybe right now they don't have, the buying potential, or they're not leaders of organizations, but literally in the blink of an eye of time, they will be. And if you didn't take the time to nurture that generation, create connection, understand how they think differently than we do, then you're going to be outdated, just like the 95% of Fortune 500 companies that don't make it every 50 years, right? The Fortune 500 companies, they churn every 50 years, almost all of them. And that's pretty scary to think about. Those are the powerhouse companies of the day. And so if they're absolutely falling away, you have to think about why, right? It's not because their products become completely outdated. It's because their methods do. And then if they don't actually keep in touch with how the next generation doesn't want to use Facebook and wants to use other types of social media tools with different types of interactions, then they're going to be completely outdated and therefore falling off of, current events and, the way in which they engage. So that's kind of what we're trying to solve for, is really helping students get access to those pathways that they otherwise wouldn't. And it really comes down to engaging industry and getting them excited about connecting with the next generation, offering opportunities for them to learn, engage, and really deliver something of meaning that actually adds value to their own career pursuits as well as the business that they're working on.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. There's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. I 100%, first of all, applause for coming up against a challenge that 1 million college students face. but being maybe the handful of the million who are like, oh, I'm actually going to do something about this. So I mean, well done there. My curiosity is, and I'll tell you why I'm asking, or the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about the integrate, what'd you call it? Industry integrated learning.
Yes.
And the value, it's not just the value that the industry integrated learning can provide for the students. I think it's the value that the students can provide for the corporations is really, and the first thing that came to mind is this idea. For some reason, I just happened to be reading about this, that Eastman Kodak, which is a classic 20th century mega corporation that essentially went the way of the dodo bird, and I think has now been resuscitated post bankruptcy in some, trifling way. But in 1975, they invented the digital camera. And because they did not really consider themselves in the business of making great cameras, they considered themselves in the business of selling lots of film. They didn't want anything to do with it. They said, we need to squash that because it will destroy us to sell a camera that doesn't require film. Kind of like if Gillette invented a perpetually sharp razor blade and couldn't sell you the blades anymore, right? And so I feel like that's a great example of a company that if they had their finger on the pulse of what the up and coming generations actually valued, they would have bet on digital cameras and they would still be around instead of having bet against digital cameras and disappeared. And that just came to mind as an example of like, man, these corporations have so much to learn in this relationship, not just, oh, well, here, let's put some stuff out there so that we can maybe cultivate some good future employees. But it's like, no, let's get some actual real-time intelligence now that can impact our business. So, but I'm curious, what has the reception been like for you? I got to imagine that colleges kind of love the idea, although they probably don't want it. I'm sure they're chintzy about paying for it, but like they see the value for the students. But do corporations see the value from the students? What's your experience been?
Yeah, I got into this mostly because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I get to talk to entrepreneurs and business leaders all the time about their challenges. And then obviously, instead of trying to solve it myself, I just mobilize a team or a class of students to work on that. And that's what just gets me excited to wake up and continue building this business every day. So that's kind of what fuels my fire. But one of the most exciting things for us is to actually watch the delivery, the shipment of that final insights from the students to the company. And one particular example that comes to mind when you asked this was, we have a pretty deep partnership now with True Religion. Similar story to, or almost similar story to what, Kodak experienced, really big, bold growth, like in the early 2000s was home name brand, like everyone knew True Religion. Then in the 2010s to 2020, everyone stopped wearing jeans and started wearing casual clothes, and working from home was a thing. And, ultimately True Religion kind of fell off, and they actually declared bankruptcy a few years ago. And now they're resurrecting the business. And instead of doing, like piecemealing the company and trying to become a whole new company, they're actually trying to get in touch with the next generation, vis-a-vis through CapSource and through our programs. And so, we've connected them with half a dozen colleges and universities through different types of projects to date. Some of them, are based on new product development and marketing. Others are based on supply chain optimizations. But one of the things that was amazing is the leader. So we actually had the CEO and the head of HR and the head of marketing and the head of digital all on the final presentation for one of these projects. I think it was with Florida Tech. And we were kind of debriefing with them and just asking them, because it was kind of a competition. We said, okay, of all the groups, which ones do you think were the top performers? And so, the head of marketing got on and said, it's amazing. You can ask your own customers for feedback, and they're not nearly as honest with you as students are. And I was like, wait, can we dig into that for a second? It's like, students are brutally honest. When you ask them, hey, can you critically think, use your critical thinking hat on how we can be a better business or how we can better serve customers, within this capacity, they are going to leave no stone left unturned. And they're going to be brutally honest. They're going to say, hey, we tried to reach out to your customer service line and we couldn't get in touch with anyone within 45 minutes. When we did, they couldn't answer our questions. These were the questions. And they legitimately craft these incredible strategies for improvement just because of their own experience and what they expect as the next generation of consumers from these types of companies. And it's like, sometimes these, B2B enterprises are like, oh, well, the students are not my customer, right? But like in 5 years, they will be managers of organizations that will be your customers if you're still around. And so that's why I think it's not just about B2C companies like True Religion or DoorDash, but other companies like LS Electric and CoinSource that are selling to enterprise users this technology that can ultimately be used, for whatever purpose that business model serves. So I think it's brilliant what students can come up with, but it is honest, right? It's like, hey, you're off base in these ways, and if you don't make changes, you'll be the way of Kodak.
Right. And you get, are the businesses, the big companies, do they tend to be, I don't know if it's, I'm sure they believe it's like, it would be hard to not believe that, oh, they'll get honest, valuable feedback, but it's I can imagine some of them not really wanting to hear it or coming up with a lot of kind of excuses why, oh, it's not in our budget. It's not in our timeline. And the reality is they just don't want to hear it. Do you get that resistance, or are you finding a lot of, you're a good marketer. You'll win them eventually anyways, but how hard is the fight? I guess is my question.
So I think that comes down to business model and product feature more so than marketing. Because, at the end of the day, this is pretty new for a lot of people. The scary thing is that experiential education in this form has been around for about 30, 40 years. So it's actually been around for a while. It hasn't really been mainstream until about 10, 15 years ago. So that's when you started seeing MBA programs, engineering programs, undergraduate business programs, and then now even some liberal arts and sciences programs really trying to make an effort to connect with nonprofits, to connect with corporations and work together on educating students and ultimately helping companies use that as a pipeline for talent. And I think, what's so interesting is like, I don't know, if you remember any of your experiences going to career fairs at colleges, but there's nothing, more painstaking than waiting online to talk to a recruiter. Like, and this also another signal that the industry is changing, like the black hole of resumes that happens when you're trying to apply through LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter. It's like thousands of applicants that are not qualified. Like there's just a problem in the way that we engage entry-level talent, especially because they don't have any experience. And one of the scariest statistics, it's like 60% of entry-level jobs require 3 years of experience. Well, like how are they supposed to get 3 years of experience if they're not getting it from college? They can't get internship programs because you're not offering them. And so it's just like, it's a weird misalignment. And it's ultimately called the skilled labor gap, right? That's actually what we like to call it. But there's more job openings for skilled labor positions than there is talent looking for jobs. But the sad part is there's such a misalignment in the skills that they have and the skills that they need that they just ultimately can't find the talent. And so that's really what problem we're trying to solve is like get these students into programs, ultimately serving that function, understanding that there are career outcomes out there. So the companies, getting them excited, engaged is not a walk in the park, because anything to them is a decision, even if it's free, to allocate time and resources to working with students and building out these programs. So we do offer free opportunities for companies to engage, which really helps. It's enabled us to build our network of hundreds of companies that have done these types of projects with us before. But then we also offer more bespoke premium experiences to them, because a lot of times companies want to drive the agenda. They don't want to have a project that has to have a deadline of May 15th because that's when the spring semester is over. Like maybe they have a quarterly meeting that ends, it's July, first week of July, reflecting on the first 2 quarters. And like, that's when they actually need the presentation as opposed to, early May. And so that's when we're starting to lean into, okay, these experiential learning opportunities at colleges and universities are really just feeders into the talent pipeline. But what you do with that talent might be an internship program, might be a fellowship program, an apprenticeship program. It might be something otherwise branded, but it's some way for you to further kind of vet and qualify talent. And, for us, that's just chasing down the average of $4,500 that's spent on an entry level hire, which, for the most part is a very ineffective use of funds because it's all on systems and processes that just allow people to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, as opposed to seeing what students are really interested in, what they can really offer an organization, and how that fits into their career trajectory. And so that's kind of what we optimize, is really identifying, ways and pathways to get the students that are top performers into intern programs and then into full-time positions, because that's the pathway that needs to exist that just doesn't right now. And I think that's the capacity that we're adding to companies and HR teams that otherwise they just couldn't offer, because it just doesn't exist.
So I mean, I find this fascinating. I'm like obsessively fascinated by what you're saying, partly because over the last 12 months, I've scaled my business from probably a staff of 50 to a staff of roughly like 200. Like, we're hiring like crazy and we're sourcing like crazy. And I'm like so familiar with what you're talking about, different positions. Some of you can full on headhunt, but everything below a certain threshold, you kind of have to rely on automated bulk type of systems and processes to try to screen talent. And it's just random. At best, it's a guess, right? And so I'm like, this is so interesting to me. And also because I am in the business of trying to create more relevant education and more curated education that actually equips students. Both, we work with a lot of adults right now because frankly, we're a private company that didn't raise any money. So we have to have customers that can have money to buy things. But eventually we will, our roadmap includes expanding into actually youth, teen and college level programs. But like I want to better prepare them for the world that exists, not, kind of try to break like this sort of ivory tower bubble effect of like, and I'm look, I was a jazz musician and a poet. Like, I love the humanities and stuff, but like, we can't be charging kids $150,000 to spend 4 years learning about romantic poetry and then send them out in the world with a $150,000 debt burden. And at best they can get a job working at the mall. I'm trying to fix that a little bit, at least. So I'm super interested in what you're saying. So can you walk me through, like, can we use my company as like kind of a quick example? And like, how would I integrate with your platform to get access to the student intelligence and give the students a meaningful experience that was a win-win all around? Like, do you mind kind of walking me through it? And I know we don't have a ton of time, but like even like the 5 or 10 minute version.
Yeah, no, for sure. So there's two approaches. There's the free and then there's the paid. The paid gives you a lot more flexibility and customizability around the outcomes you're trying to drive. So for example, if you were trying to staff up a sales team or a marketing team, we would design case-based and project-based engagements to help you ultimately select top talent that will last longer and provide better outcomes to your business. So for example, a marketing case would be surrounding, okay, how do we get this podcast into more places? How do we ultimately create additional product lines that will enable us to reach more customers that meet our target audience profile?
Can I give you an actual like real scenario for us? Like, we crush it on Facebook. We crush it on YouTube. We do reasonably well on Instagram. I would say our marketing team is very stymied when it comes to really, really getting traction on TikTok or Snapchat.
For example, here's what I would do, right? So the premium approach to CapSource for industry partners is case-based assessments to fill internships. So the case assessment is actually free, and then our internship management platform is premium. So case-based assessments are essentially a case study that you can challenge candidates with. They upload their response to prove that they've learned enough about your business and that they can actually think critically about solving your problem. It's completely asynchronous. They do it on their own. We provide them with the resources ahead of time, and then we distribute that to 120 universities. Something really cool, by the way, as a caveat to this, is that we take that same content and we make that case database available to university faculty as an educational resource, completely open and free to them. So just by posting a case study on CapSource, you could start to get ideas, but more importantly, you could start to identify top performers or top candidates that could potentially be added to a real synchronous project-based experience. And so that's basically an internship, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to give you a project. So maybe the first one is, hey, we want to know how, like, what would be your recommendations to make improvements on our TikTok and Snapchat social strategy? So that would be the case-based assessment. And then I would say that the project-based assessment is a series of 3 to 4 milestones. How do companies similar to you use social? What impact are they making, and how do they drive outcomes? How would you ultimately craft a social strategy, keeping in mind these 3 are better performing than these 2? How can we ultimately set this up better in the future? And then the third milestone might be, okay, actually begin to create sample content, a calendar, and set goals for the upcoming year. So maybe you have 40 applicants submit the case assessment. We ultimately select the top 10, split them up into 2 teams. We give them that project of, okay, we want you to set goals and ultimately our strategy for social for the upcoming year. And then my guess is of that 10 that participate, from the 40 that applied, 2 to 4 of them are going to be absolutely, like, hands down top performers, qualified, vetted, interested in helping you actually implement the strategy that they just created. And so that's ultimately how we incubate kind of this whole, we call it experiential hiring, how we incubate this process for companies. It's different, right? It's not, okay, I identify that we have gaps in our social, so I'm going to go hire social media people. It's, hey, I identify that we have gaps in social, so we're going to start to create a pipeline of people that are interested in solving our social challenge. And then we're going to take the top performers and actually activate them as resources internally to implement the plan and actually succeed in improving the social aspect of your business.
So in essentially so once they kind of graduate from, experimental data contributors to, hey, we like this, we'd like you to help us integrate or implement, those could be paid interns, they could be free interns, like that at that point, it's kind of between the student and the company.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, after the intern programs, the best success stories, about 20% of the students get hired for follow-on employment.
Yeah. So then we basically say, hey, go ahead and finish your studies. We've got a spot for you when you graduate, or maybe you don't even finish. Come on, we're hiring.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times the students are available to actually begin contributing right there and then. Right. Otherwise, they could do part-time. They could wait until afterwards. I have always worked with students. It's germane to our model. We attract them. The ones that are, my co-founder was on our first live case experience that we designed for the University of Maryland. And then he kind of got an internship with the company that we connected the school with. And then after that was like, how did this whole thing come together? Like, this is amazing. So much better than my other classes. His name is Ankush. He's now our director of product. And so he came to me and was like, got connected and was like, oh my God, like, I want to help you scale this. And that's experiential hiring. It's like, I worked on it. I understand it. I showed that I understand it and demonstrated that I can add value. Will you accept me as part of your team? And then, he was working full-time at Accenture and still a student and also, co-founder of CapSource. So the students have the capability to take on whatever. They also can continue to get credit if they're still students for several years to come, just by continuing to work on projects for you that we can design through the system and make sure that that's something that aligns with their studies.
Wow. And you get to start to vet for the most difficult and fuzziest of traits, which is actual passion. How the hell in a recruiting process do you know if people are actually going to be passionate about the work you do? And this way, the passion rises to the top. I mean, the passion is the cream that rises. I get it, man. I see it. So yeah, I mean, so then give me the short, and again, I wish we weren't out of time. Like, we should do this again, but I know we have like 7 or 8 minutes. How did you, is this the company that you start? Because you started a company at Lehigh that you sold, And then CapSource is a new venture. Is that right?
Yeah. So we identified, it's actually funny. We identified that schools wanted synchronous experiential learning. So we were selling case studies like exclusively as my previous business, which was called Real-Time Cases. And so we noticed content, it's kind of a nice bridge between the old philosophy of content-based education and the new philosophy of experiential learning. And we're trying to provide certain pathways for companies to just contribute more actively content so that the case study was kind of living and breathing. But ultimately what we realized by talking to different universities over and over again, we're like, hey, the case studies are better than, maybe the Harvard traditional, packet of information, but there's no interaction with the company, and that's what the students really need. And I was like, oh, that's all, like, why don't we just provide that? My other founders were just like vehemently against, providing access. They were like, it's a marketplace model. Like, we don't want to build that. It's too hard to manage. It's too much of a tech product and not as a tech powered education business, which is what that company was. And so I said, you know what? I think that there's a really big use case here to actually go to market with a technology system that helps universities coordinate these types of experiential learning opportunities. And, for the listeners out there that are, thinking about how do you become an entrepreneur, I'll just give you a little anecdote of how we got started. So I noticed that problem while I was starting a different business, and, we were already producing content and raised money and, we're running that business. And I actually got the bug again and said, actually, there's a different way to solve this problem that I think would be even more valuable to the industry as a whole. And so I launched CapSource to solve that problem. And so I didn't have any resources that I could take out of the first business. Like, that's definitely not how you, ultimately leave your old founders. So, we just decided it was kind of a company started from scratch. And, I reached out to some advisors and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Like, do you know folks that might be interested in this? And instead of solving the problem with technology, which is what we do now, we solve the problem with will and manpower, right? I said, okay, I'm going to actually help you build your program. What do you need? I need 20 companies in 3 weeks that want, half of which are nonprofits, half of which are for-profit, located in around major cities. This is one of our first main clients, University of Notre Dame. They send their MBA program all over the States to do a 1-week research project on site with companies. And so that was like one of our first clients, is like they just needed help finding the companies and planning the logistics of what the students were going to work on, where they're going to be located, and ultimately who is going to be in charge of mentoring them. And so I literally built that out on Google Docs with spreadsheets. I sent my client a list of names with contact information, locations of their office, and then I sent them a Dropbox of Google Docs that were all formatted the same way. And slowly but surely, we went to, built an engineering team, started, having enough resources to pay them, and said, okay, we're going to productize the industry network. We're going to productize the project charter. We're going to productize the request for proposal. Now we're going to productize internship programs for companies and the case assessments that they can use to actually qualify candidates and recruit them in a way that helps them demonstrate their capabilities. So you can't start, with like a moonshot of a business model. You have to start by solving a very specific problem for a very specific segment of customers that represents the larger business opportunity. And then slowly but surely, as you solve that problem for those customers, you can broaden how you solve it for a larger segment of that audience. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is to engage in continuous dialogue with the types of stakeholders that you ultimately want to help. And you should be very obsessed with those people, right? Because if you're not obsessed with educators, then it would be bad for me, as an education technology entrepreneur, to try and sell that product, right? So that's ultimately who I look for on my sales team. That's ultimately, what we're trying to do as a business, is really help shape the way that institutions educate their students. And we need to do that with educators buying into our model, their schools and their administration buying into our model, their alumni, right? That's a big piece of this. How do you get alumni re-engaged, in the community? What a great way. Mentor the students through projects that are serving your organization. And so that's what ultimately creates tons of new opportunities and pathways for students.
Yeah, I think it's so cool and such an insightful lesson that I hope everybody really got, because I think a lot of times, and we talk about, in my world, we talk a lot about the MVP, the minimum viable product, right? And for you as an ed tech, and we've talked about where the line is on the difference between technology powered education and educational technology. But, for you, I think a lot of times this MVP concept, people use it in like a service model. They use it in like maybe like an info product, like, oh, I'm going to create the first module of my course and sell it. And then I'll, as people start to consume it, I'll build the next few modules. But I don't think people really think of the MVP concept when it comes to very heavy tech driven solutions, because everybody thinks, oh, tech is really expensive and time consuming to build. So if I want to launch a tech company or a company with technology at its foundation, I just need to go borrow a bunch of money. And that's why I love the story you just told, because you didn't focus on the technology. You focused on the client and the experiential innovation that you were trying to create to serve that client. And you were like, look, if I got to do some manual heavy lifting in the short term to create that, I'll do it. And then, like you said, as you started and you focus, you got one client who was kind of like your bellwether. If I can make this work for Notre Dame, I can make it work for everyone else. And I'm going to love on Notre Dame, and I'm going to stay up all night for Notre Dame if I have to. And I'll do it all in freaking free cloud-based Google Docs. And then you got some momentum. That was your MVP. That was an MVP strategy of launching a tech company, which you don't hear about very often. Or that's not how Silicon Valley sells it. Because they want you to just bring them your idea and they go, here's $500,000, give us 60%, right? But you can do tech with the MVP model. By the way, Entre Institute, we're technology powered education. I launched it with a $20,000 startup budget and thousands of hours of my own time, right? And it can be done. And I'm glad you shared that story, because I think that we need to broaden the view of the startup mindset out there to say you can start almost any type of company with an MVP bootstrap model that doesn't require giving your company away, basically, if you're willing to work your ass off.
This is really true. And honestly, if you're doing a good job, your customers will tell you how you can continue to solve their problems, and they'll pay you more and more.
Yeah.
To solve harder and harder problems, but you have to demonstrate that. I will leave you with this. I always say revenue is a rite of passage, right? You have to start with the 3-figure deals to work your way to the 4-figure deals, the 5, the 6. And really what that is you can demonstrate not only as a leader, but also as an organization with team members that all contribute to a final goal and deliverable for clients to meet deadlines, to ultimately help them achieve their goals. If you can actually do that, and they're willing to get on the phone for potential new clients of yours and say, hey, this thing is the best thing since sliced bread for our particular use case, then that's what ultimately creates that kind of growth mentality, that perpetual ability to grow as a business, and enables you to get that 4-figure deal, that 5-figure deal, and then eventually grow into a bigger business. So, we're emerging from that kind of early. It took several years. I mean, CapSource was really kind of started in late 2017 with our first client, and really we didn't even deploy technology until late 2018, and then in 2019 one of our clients literally was looking at our platform and was like, hey, I will pay you if you will let me put my logo where your logo is. And that was our first kind of aha moment. Wow, we just created a SaaS product, didn't even realize we were doing that, right? And it's like, that's the kind of thing that ultimately happens when you are relentlessly client serving. You work your ass off, you're lean, but you ultimately build a good product that helps people achieve the outcomes that you promise them in their initial discussion. So I've had a really good time here, Jeff. It really means a lot to me to help other entrepreneurs learn and grow. We actually are constantly doing campaigns with entrepreneurship educators that are similarly situated to you. They have an audience of people that are kind of interested in entrepreneurship. And what I would recommend is, apply to one of our startup, entrepreneurship internship programs. Like, there's no one who's too young or old to do an internship program. If you want to learn what it's like to be an entrepreneur, rather than investing your own money and time into creating a business, if you're not sure you want to do that, find a business that you can help that is an entrepreneurial venture. Find out what it's like to have to do accounting and finance, what it's like to do your own marketing, including social and content, what it's like to build a team and develop HR and resources for new hires. Like, how do you ultimately develop a technology product and from an MVP level and improvements and engineering teams? There's so many aspects to building a business. So I think it's most important that you, as a kind of aspiring entrepreneur, figure out what it's like to be an entrepreneur, what your skill sets are, and more importantly, what skill sets you need in order to achieve the ultimate dream that you have as a business, because you're never going to be able to do it alone. It is impossible. So you have to understand, okay, I'm marketing and sales. We need someone who's going to be product focused, and another one who's going to be finance and accounting and fundraising focused. And so if you have that ability and that foresight, then you'll be much more successful much more quickly.
Amen. Amen. And I'm going to reiterate, revenue is a rite of passage. That is so true. In our community, we say, listen, the money comes last. You qualify for the money when you've done all these other things. But I love the way you said that revenue is a rite of passage. Jordan, thank you so much for an incredible conversation that I hope is not, and I'm insistent that this is not our last conversation. How can people get more access to you? Social media, your business, like where would you direct people?
Yeah, so capsource.io is our website. So feel free to check us out there. You can also, directly schedule a time with our team right from our homepage, learn more about the different offerings for, your user type, if you're a company or if you're ultimately a school or educator or students. And then I would say, all the social out there, we got our profiles running. So feel free to search for CapSource, you'll find us. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. So reach out. I'm definitely a friendly connector and would love to continue growing my network and help you grow yours.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Most entrepreneurs don't know how to manage people. So they basically say, do my social media, do my internet marketing. And as we know, that doesn't work. And so today, we create many of those systems and processes for our clients.